Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for The Watchers. And this film, we focus on this artist known as Mina, and she lives in Western Ireland, and one day she ends up getting trapped in this forest, and eventually ends up finding shelter alongside three other strangers, and quickly comes to realize that these strangers are trapped in this, they're basically trapped in this, glass sort of this safe house of sorts where they every single night they are constantly stalked by mysterious creatures, and so Mina has to try to find her way to navigate this situation, but also adapt to her new surroundings. And I was very excited for this film. This is a movie that kind of came out of nowhere for me. Like, I knew that it was a thing, but I really wasn't that excited for it until I saw the teaser before, I believe it was the first time I saw Doom Part 2, they showed the teaser for this movie, and honestly, really blew me away. Like, I thought it looked so incredibly eerie. It had such an interesting concept to it. I loved the, the dark and ominous sort of imagery that was presented, and it really just seemed like it had the potential to be a very effective sort of thriller. Like I said, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but all the marketing really worked out for me. I was really excited to see also that this wasn't directed by M. Night Shyamalan, but his daughter. I wanted to see what she would really bring to the table, and I was really hoping this film would end up delivering something really effective, and I could come away and saying, hey, this is yet another really strong directorial debut for horror and things like that. And while there certainly are effective moments throughout this film, as a whole, The Watchers just really didn't end up working for me, and honestly did leave me feeling quite disappointed. But we are getting into right now, starting off with the cast here. Now, when it comes to the cast in this movie, that is an area of this film that I think mostly does excel very well. That was one of the things I was most looking forward to, and I think everyone here does really deliver, especially when it comes to Dakota Fanning, who I feel like as an actress, she's been trying to have this surge lately, but she really hasn't had, like, that one specific role that just, like, really reminds us of her talents. There's been things that she's popped in on and she's been good in, but this is easily her strongest performance in a really long time. And what I'm glad to see that this is a film that really does utilize her very well. I mean, this is the kind of character that, has her own sort of personal tragedy that she's going through, but she also very much feels like the audience. She is just as terrified and unsure of herself throughout this situation, as we are. And I think that she just does a really great job at, showing how she reacts to the situation, showing how she kind of evolves as the film goes on. She also adds a sense of heart to the film that I think otherwise wouldn't be there. I really enjoyed her performance in this film, and I think that she added layers to this character that really just wouldn't have been there otherwise, and I really enjoyed the work that she was doing overall, so I thought her performance was really strong here. And Georgina Campbell, once again, I think gives another really good performance here. This is not at all on the level of, like, a Barbarian, but I think she once again shows, like, just how strong of an actress that she really is. We'll talk about the characters she's playing a little bit later, but I think performance-wise, I really liked what she ended up doing in this film. But the other performance that I think really sticks out here is that of Olwen. I've always been a fan of hers, and I think that she's given some really strong performances, but here, I think this is easily some of the strongest work I've ever seen from her. The second that that you first meet her in this movie, she is just so incredibly captivating, but also such a endlessly intriguing character. She adds so much heft to the movie. She adds so much tension, especially, you are very fearful of who she is, but she also kind of seems like the person that is the most level-headed out of the group, and I think that she does a really good job of kind of diving headfirst into that. There's some monologues she has that I think are really strong in this movie, and I think she does give a really good performance. All the performances here are really good here. Definitely, there are quite a few issues with this movie, but for the most part, I think the performances are one of the stronger aspects of this film. But now we got to get to the things that unfortunately really do bring this film down, and that is the directing and the writing. Now, look, when it comes to Ishana Night Shyamalan, this was really the main reason I was excited to see this film. I wanted to see what she would bring to the table, but also I wanted to see how her style would differentiate from that of her father's. I mean, you know, we've seen a lot of debates recently about like Nepo babies and things like that, and is there merit to having your child, you know, direct a film or act in a film, or is this just trying to leech off of that actor or director's success? Does the talent remain within the family, or is that just in one, you know, with the original relative of that family? Is that something that is able to be maintained throughout this film? And I can say this, I think Ishana as a director does have a lot of promise. There are things that she does in this film that I really do like, particularly the way she crafts suspense, I think is really well done. The movie has this very ominous feel to it, especially throughout the first 2 acts or so of this movie. I'll talk about some of the other things in a little bit, but I think that she does a good job of knowing when to craft suspense, knowing how to add this sense of tension. I think she does a really good job with that, but also adding this sort of like fantasy type angle to it, I think does work really well. The issue for me is that I just don't think she has fully honed her skills yet, and you really do watch this movie and it feels like this is a first-time director, and I hate saying that because I think we've had some really great examples lately of first-time directors that just right out of the gate have given us such incredible starts and make themselves seem like they have been doing this forever, and this doesn't seem like their first like real foray. Unfortunately for Ishana, it does kind of feel that way. I think that, like I said, I'm excited to see where she goes as a director from this movie because I think she does have potential. It just isn't that, it just doesn't feel like she has fully found her niche yet. She's still trying to figure out what really is my style, what really am I trying to convey, what am I doing differently from that of my father. I think she still needs to kind of figure that out. I think, like I said, when it comes to like building tension, when it comes to crafting a solid mystery, I think she does a really good job with that. It just doesn't feel like she has fully realized what she wants to do yet, and I think that is something that I can't fully hold against her because this is her first time directing, and I feel like she definitely can get to a place where, you know, she gives us a film and we really get to see her, you know, hone her skills as a director and really understand her style and become a lot more confident. It just kind of feels like she's holding back here a bit, and I think that is like the one thing I will say about her directing. But what I can say is that while I think she's very good directing-wise, writing-wise, I really do not think she is there yet, because that is easily my biggest issue when it comes to this film. Now, I will say this. The first, like, 40, 50 minutes of this movie, I actually thought was pretty solid. I thought they did a good job of, you know, crafting this really simple idea. You have these 4 characters that, like I said, they're in kind of this bunker of sorts that they've nicknamed the Coop, and you see them kind of, you know, their day-to-day lives of them trying to do what they can to, you know, occupy themselves, but then also have to protect themselves from these creatures. There are rules that are established that I think are really interesting, and they do a really good job of laying out the ideas of what this is all about. And I was like, okay, I actually like where we're going with this. I think that it's a very simple premise, but it is one that is very effective. There are many moments in this film where, you know, there are characters that there are moments where they're very close to being caught or something is going to go wrong, and I really did find myself quite, you know, tense, not knowing what was going to happen. I think those moments are really effective, and I think the movie does a good job in building that. And like I said, I think the first 40 minutes are actually really good, but I will caution you right now, I'm not going to tell you what happens, but the central premise of this movie really only is the first 40 to 50-ish minutes of this film. Once we get to a certain point, the movie kind of deviates into something else. And once it turns into that something else, the film just kind of lost me from there, and I wasn't really a fan of what they were trying to do. I think the movie, it dived a lot more into like the lore of this world and of this, place, and how this all came to be, and really just started to explain things that I didn't need explaining. I felt like it honestly was better off not being explained, and I think it would have been that much more effective as a result, and I think that was something that really did hurt the film for me. So that already was a big problem, is that, like I said, I think the first 40 minutes, kind of had me, but then once it got to a certain point and they started to kind of over-explain things, I really just started to check out a bit. I was like, okay, this is just starting to feel a bit more conventional. I'm not really liking the directions that this is going. But even prior to that, even though I was enjoying the first, a bit of this movie, there were still some pretty significant issues for me. And the biggest one, unfortunately, is that I just could not connect to a majority of these characters. Now, Mina, the main character, I think is pretty good. She has a personal tragedy that she herself is going through, and it's really eating away at her, and you see her kind of struggle with that throughout this movie. You kind of see her using this coup as a way to kind of punish herself with the constant grief, but also the guilt that she is feeling. There is something that has happened that, that happened within her childhood that has really just kind of plagued her, and I think that part of the film is very effective. I found myself connecting to her character. I really latched onto the dilemma that she was going through. I think the movie does a pretty good job with that. When it comes to the other characters in this film, I really just had a hard time latching onto them. Georgina Campbell's character, she has this thing where she has her husband that has gone missing, and there's a part of it that is, somewhat effective, but it feels so incredibly underwritten. We never really get a sense of what really is going on. We don't really dive any deeper into her character beyond that, and so I just had a hard time really latching onto her. When it comes to Olwen Fiore's character, Madeline, we're supposed to believe that she's been here the longest out of everybody, and on some level you care for her because she is the one that seems the most well prepared. She, there's a lot of mystery surrounding her character, and I think that is very interesting. But just in terms of her development overall, I just wasn't really connecting to her. I found myself quite disconnected from what was going on there. And then when it comes to Oliver Finnegan's character of Daniel, he's easily the most blank slate out of everybody. There are many moments, and also I think easily the most frustrating character. Like, if you want to talk about a film that has one character that just really gets on your nerves with these constant terrible decisions that he's making, but also just really annoys you in him getting irritated and him going against the rules that have been established. I mean, look no further than Daniel. There are so many moments in this movie where it's like, Daniel, you're not supposed to be doing this. Why are you doing this? And yet he does it anyway, and he keeps doing it throughout the movie, and it is so incredibly frustrating to watch. And it's one of those things where it's hard to fully buy into it, because you're supposed to believe that these three characters have been here for a long time, but with the constant reckless decisions that this guy is making, I have no idea how they have survived up to this point. Like, I generally don't understand how they have been able to survive when this guy continues to just be doing the dumbest shit possible and putting them in active danger throughout the movie. So I had a really hard time latching on to him. I also didn't really feel the chemistry between these actors. I didn't really feel a bond that was growing between them. You're supposed to feel like they are getting closer throughout the movie. There's one scene that I think does a good job with that, but other than that, I just didn't really feel like they did a great job at really connecting us to them as a group. It feels much more like this is like very circumstantial, and I think because a lot of these characters feel very distant, it kind of causes us to not really feel any connection. Mina especially, as much as I liked her character, feels very distant, and it doesn't really feel like she gets to a point where she's like loosening up or opening up more to the group about things that is going on. That doesn't really seem to be really a big focus in this film. I don't really think that a lot of attention was paid to these characters, and so again, I just had a hard time latching on to them. And so I was intrigued. I liked a lot of what the film was trying to set up. What are these creatures all about? Why are they, hunting these 4 characters? Why do they, have this like void? What is the fascination with them? What's really going on there? I think there are a lot of interesting ideas that the film is trying to set up. Problem is, once we get answers to those ideas, it really just didn't end up working for me, specifically when it comes to the third act of this movie, because aside from, some moments that I did enjoy involving Mina's character, like I said, a lot of this third act of the movie is plagued by just a lot of unnecessary backstory. There's a ton of focus on lore, but then there is another direction that the movie takes, and I get what she is trying to do. I get the idea of what she's trying to say. The problem is there are things we are told early on in the movie, and this completely contradicts it and really just makes the film so much more muddled as a result. A lot of things just weren't really making sense to me. I found myself just having a lot more questions than I did answers, and it just really kind of ends up breaking the movie, unfortunately. And so I really just think that the screenplay needed a lot of work. I couldn't tell if it was just that maybe the ideas that Ishana is trying to tackle are too ambitious for a first-time director. Maybe she needed time to kind of look over this movie and figure out what story she really wanted to tell. It just felt like there was so much more that this could have been. And when it came down to the actual twist, when it came down to the actual reveal of what's going on, I just felt very underwhelmed. And I think the movie, there's so much more that they could have dived into. There's so many more ideas that they could have tackled here, and it just feels like it wasn't fully utilized, unfortunately. And especially when it comes to the third act of the movie, the actual, there's this big reveal of sorts that ends up happening and really just ends up crumbling so much of the good work the film had set up to this point. There's just it just makes literally no sense whatsoever. It's one of those things where, like, I'm trying to connect the dots. I'm trying to understand what they are trying to say, but it just didn't fully come together. And I think it just really ended up bringing the film down. So, while I do think there are some good ideas at play, it just didn't really end up amounting to all that much in the end. And even things that were kind of working for me, like I said, Mina as a character and like what she was going through, I really did find myself invested in. But the way they ended up concluding it just felt very abrupt. I think they really should have peppered that more throughout the movie. It feels like they started off and they, had this idea, and every so often they kind of went back to it, but I think that should have been a much bigger focus throughout the movie, because especially the end of the film was just really jarring for me, the way they decided to wrap things up. It just didn't. So again, I think it just feels like a first draft. Like, that's the best way I can sum it up. It doesn't feel like these ideas were really looked into. So really that ends up being the biggest issue with this film. And I think the thing that's even more unfortunate about it is that I think that knowing that this was her directorial debut, and she was obviously I think she was always going to be viewed in the shadow of her father. That's just kind of how it works when it comes to nepotism and things like that. I don't think it's necessarily fair, but unfortunately that is what was going to happen. I think that she really needed to try to do something drastically different here, and honestly, she really doesn't. While yes, I think she goes in kind of a fantastical direction towards the end of this movie, that's not unlike something her father hasn't done before. So I really think she needs to either figure out more of her style or just really come up with different ideas and really do something that sticks out. Because right now, I think that someone who isn't really, paying, that's like paid, close attention to who's directing the movie and who's writing the movie, they might go into this and literally just think that M. Night directed and wrote it, because it's not that dissimilar from what he has done, and that's unfortunate because as a film that is really trying to prop up his daughter, it really doesn't make a great case for that. So I think that really is like the main thing that brings this movie down, unfortunately. From a cinematography perspective, I think this film is really well done. They talked before how it was shot on real location, and you really do feel it when you're in the woods or inside the coop. I mean, you really get that isolated, claustrophobic feeling. There's so many, when they're in the woods especially, it's so vast. There's so many places that they can go, but yet they also feel so trapped because they have to be confined to this one location. And I think the scenes inside the coop especially are really good, and I really found myself drawn to that part of the movie. There's one scene in particular involving music and things like that I thought was just very effective, and I really liked the way that was all handled. And so I think cinematography wise, the film works out really well. I think even the design of the creatures, when we eventually do get to see that, I think is really impressive. I think they really did a great job at, looking at creating, creating these creatures and what really they're all about, and really giving them a very distinctive look. I think they did a really good job with that. The score is pretty good in this movie. It elevates the tension when needed. And the editing, I just think this movie is way too short. I think there needed to be a lot more time to delve deeper into some of the ideas that this movie was presenting, particularly when it gets into like the backstory and things like that. It just feels like we're being told way too much at once. And so I felt so bombarded by all these reveals, all these new details that weren't presented before. It just felt like too much, and it's so much to take in. I honestly couldn't even remember half of what they revealed because there's just so much that is being thrown at you at once. And when I think they really should have taken the time to slowly present things to us and really see how it affects these characters, I think the film would have been much better as a result. But unfortunately, the film seems to be a little bit too concerned about like lore and backstory as opposed to like characters and height and tension and things like that. I think it really kind of got away from what it was doing well. So I think there's just a lot of things that was just very frustrating about this film. The Watchers is not at all a terrible movie. There are things that I do enjoy. There's some good performances here. There's some very interesting ideas, some very effective moments of suspense. But unfortunately, it is bogged down by the fact that it is helmed by a director and writer that just isn't quite there yet. I think, like I said, Ishana does have a future. I do see the potential within her. I think really the main takeaway needs to be, I think she just needs to figure out what she did well in this film and try to expand upon it, because there are things that she does do well here. I think when it comes to the fantastical sort of nature that she dives into here, I think that's good. I think her suspense is good. I think the tension is good. I think some of the ideas of what she's doing, are really good ideas. I just think that she really needs to figure out, what can I do to separate myself from the films that, my father has done. And I think when she does that, she will be a much better director as a result. But I also think that she just really needs to take the time to hone in on, some of the ideas that she built into this movie, and hopefully become a more, and hopefully with time, get to that point where she can be a much more dynamic director. I definitely think she has it in her. I just don't really think she's there yet. And I think that really is the main thing that does hurt this film. The screenplay in particular is just really rushed. There are a lot of ideas that the movie's trying to dive into, but it just doesn't really do the greatest job with. There are reveals here that just really end up undermining the film and honestly make it really hard to buy into. There are characters that are mostly flat, aside from a couple moments here and there. So I really just had a hard time latching onto this movie. So having said all that, I am going to give The Watchers overall a C. But over, guys, to my review of The Watchers. Let me know if you guys saw this movie. I'll lift your thoughts, and I will see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.